When we look at ancient Ayurvedic texts, it's tempting to view them through the lens of modern spa culture. But a close reading reveals something entirely different, a highly structured, strict clinical algorithm. This precision is particularly evident in Chapter 14 of the Karaka Samhita, known as Sveda Adhayaya. Sveda, or sudation therapy, acts as a severe clinical intervention designed to alter human physiology through targeted heat. These specific shlokas, numbers 3 and 4, define the exact purpose of this therapy within the larger clinical framework. The core definition restricts Sveda to diseases manifested specifically by vitiated vata and kapha doshas. By establishing these boundaries, the text frames heat as a medicine that requires exact parameters to be deployed safely. The algorithm mandates an absolute prerequisite rule. Sveda karma must only be conducted after sneha karma, or oleation therapy. Applying intense heat to a dry, unlubricated biological system leads to severe tissue damage. Pre-oiling the body allows the subsequent heat to safely mobilize and eliminate internal blockages. Shloka 4 details the specific mechanical results. This sequence clears the elimination of urine, feces, and semen. The combination of lipids followed by heat brings the erratic nature of the vata dosha under control. Thermal therapy functions as the second phase in a rigid, two-step biochemical sequence. Before treatment begins, the physician must identify who is physiologically capable of surviving this intervention. Primary respiratory indications include coryza, severe cough, hiccup, and dyspnea. The protocol also targets vata-specific conditions, particularly Bell's palsy, sciatica, and generalized body stiffness or heaviness. However, the list of absolute contraindications serves as a collection of systemic red flag warnings. This pathological list bars patients suffering from bleeding disorders, diarrhea, or severe diabetes from receiving heat therapy. The reasoning behind these bans is based on thermal stability. Adding exogenous heat to a system already suffering from internal heat or depletion, characteristic of the Pitta dosha, causes systemic failure. The Karaka Samhita protects the patient by rigorously defining exclusion criteria long before detailing the treatment. Even in approved patients, the application of heat is governed by strict anatomical zoning laws. The text identifies 3 highly restricted zones that must be protected from standard sudation. The primary rule for these specific organs is that they ideally receive absolutely zero heat therapy. If therapy is essential in these regions, the algorithm only permits mridu, which is the mildest form of sudation described in the text. Different organs have different thermal thresholds. The power is throttled to protect vital and sensory centers. With the patient cleared and boundary set, we can examine the vast taxonomy of delivery system. Diagram illustrates how we can plot this entire framework. To understand how the system operates, we have to place the patient at the center of a 3-dimensional map of intersecting therapeutic axes. The first axis is intensity. The second is dvandva, representing mutually antagonistic pairs, and the third represents the 23 specific clinical modalities. By deconstructing and controlling these variables, the practitioner transforms an everyday bodily function into a highly targeted medical intervention. The first clinical filter a practitioner applies is intensity. This variable dictates the primary dose and sheer physical force of the therapy. At the top end is Mahasveda, or strong sudation. This maximum intensity protocol is reserved for patients possessing high physical vitality who are battling severe pathology. Step down 1 level and you reach Madhyamasveda, the medium therapy. This bridges the gap for moderate disease states and is uniquely indicated for specific anatomical regions. Finally, the slider drops to the lowest intensity, Mridusveda, or mild therapy. This biological safeguard protects patients with low vitality. Heavy thermal loads destroy delicate tissue. Thus, mild therapy is the absolute limit for 3 clinical contraindications: the eyes, the heart, and the testicles. The intensity axis establishes a clear rule of thumb. The system actively prioritizes the preservation of delicate human architecture over aggressive treatment. Once intensity is calibrated, the practitioner moves to the second axis of the matrix, Dvandva Sveda. This axis maps 3 antagonistic pairs. The first divides by heat source, Agni using direct fire versus Niragni, non-thermal methods. The second splits by application site, localized Ekanga versus whole body Sarvanga. The third classifies consistency, moist, snigdha, versus entirely dry, ruksha. This distinction requires exact algorithmic matching. If a patient presents with a vata disorder, characterized in Ayurveda by dryness and erratic movement, the practitioner must deploy a moist, snigdha therapy to intercept it. Conversely, a kapha disorder, marked by heavy, cold properties and fluid retention, strictly demands a dry, ruksha therapy to counteract the excess moisture. Dvandva Sveda effectively removes practitioner guesswork. By cross-referencing specific pathology against these binary pairs, the correct therapeutic mechanism locks directly into place. We can now look closer at the execution layer, starting with the Agni node. This branch focuses entirely on manipulating exogenous heat, transferring energy from an external source into the patient. This grid divides 13 methodologies into 3 subgroups. The first covers localized conduction, like Sankara boluses and Nadi steam tubes. The second scales to immersive fluid environments, including Avagaha baths and Parisheka sprinklings. The final shifts to massive architectural thermodynamics, constructing entirely dedicated clinical spaces. Some of these architectural methods rely on specific geographical engineering. Ashmagana utilizes a massive heated stone bed, while Bhusveda leverages the Earth's thermal mass. The 13 Agni Svedas are a direct application of physical science. They use engineered external environments to force a physiological response from the outside in. But external heat is only half the equation. The taxonomy then pivots to the near-Ignoni methods. As this diagram maps out, near-Ignoni methods are a sophisticated categorization of endogenous heat generation. These protocols force the body to produce heat entirely from within. The first set of internal triggers relies on heavy physiological loads. This induces sweating through sheer mechanical exertion, listing Vyama, or physical exercise, and Ahava, competitive wrestling. The next set manipulates internal states through metabolic stress and insulation. This includes Kshuddha Nigradana, the deliberate suppression of hunger, alongside Guru Pravarana, trapping body heat by covering the patient with thick blankets. The most radical inclusion in this 10-part list relies on psychogenic triggers. Sweating can be clinically induced by pushing the patient into states of bhaya, extreme fear, or krodha, intense anger. Grouping emotional states like fear and anger alongside physical wrestling identifies a direct link between the mind's stress response and bodily temperature regulation. The text accounts for a physiological spike from fight or fright as a reliable sweat trigger. Near Agni Sveda leverages the entire brain-body axis. It uses the patient's own metabolic processes and psychological stress responses as the primary clinical instruments. This diagram shows the entire architectural framework. The taxonomy tree starts at the central patient, filters by intensity, routes through antagonistic pairs, and terminates at 23 specific modalities. A practitioner navigates sequentially, routing a fragile patient through Mrudu, Ekanga, and Snigdha, landing precisely on Nadi. Svedatya functions as a clinical algorithm. It requires the practitioner to process these variables in a specific sequence to reach an engineered treatment protocol. By calculating the limits of intensity, tracking heat sources, defining application perimeters, choosing moisture consistencies, and balancing internal versus external triggers, metabolic load and emotional stress both generate measurable endogenous heat within this thermal framework. Because heat delivery methods vary, the physician must use biofeedback to determine when to stop. Samyak Yoga defines the markers of a perfect dose: the appearance of sweat, relief from cold, and reduced stiffness. These changes signal the intervention is complete. This is contrasted by symptoms of Ati Yoga, or thermal overdose, aggravation of pitta, fainting, and severe thirst. Systemic exhaustion is a critical danger, marked by sudden weakness in the patient's voice and body. Real-time physiological responses, rather than a fixed timer, act as the ultimate metric for dosage control. The clinical process continues even after the heat is removed. The post-sedation regimen requires a specific diet and the absolute avoidance of strenuous exercise. The Karaka Samhita details a medical protocol requiring absolute precision at every stage, from the initial application of oil to the final dietary prescription.